Welcome to IVC's GDPR in Practice, Stage 1. In order to get the best out of this training, you should have already viewed the GDPR awareness video. If you have not already done so, I would encourage you to pause this and view it now. If that is not possible, I would suggest that you watch the GDPR awareness video immediately after this presentation. This video will be most beneficial for non-clinical support staff, such as receptionists, administrators, or anyone else who might cover reception. The objectives of this presentation are to understand the basic concepts that outline GDPR, understand what a DSAR, also known as a DSAR, or Data Subject Access Request is, be able to distinguish between a routine day-to-day request and a DSAR as specified under GDPR, understand the procedure to be followed to submit a DSAR, understand your role in keeping client and staff data safe in practice, to be able to state what a data breach is, and to understand the consequences of a data breach, both at practice and company level. So, what is GDPR? A quick recap. When discussing GDPR, there are some key terms that you will come into contact with frequently. They are data, which basically means information. There is the data subject, and that is the person or organisation to whom that information relates to. Processing is a very broad term and literally means anything that is done with that data. So that could be collecting, using it, storing it, disclosing it, editing it, or disposing of that data. Consent refers to the permission to use data. Not only just that we can use their data, but it also outlines the purposes for which we are allowed to use that data. And there's DSAR, also known as a Data Subject Access Request. This is the formal request where a person asks to see all of the information that we hold on them. GDPR stands for the General Data Protection Regulation, and it comes into effect on the 25th of May 2018. Broadly speaking, it is a set of rules and guidelines about how we should handle the data that we hold. It outlines what protections we need to make sure we have in place, as well as the consequences for not meeting those responsibilities. It follows a broad set of principles. These go into quite a lot of detail, and should you wish to investigate these further, please go to the ICO website. But broadly speaking, it's that we must be transparent and fair. Staff and clients need to understand not only what data we hold on them, but why and how we use that data. As far as is reasonably possible, we need to make sure that that data is up to date and accurate. Those of you on Voyager systems will have the client details checker. You should make sure that your practice is using this to the maximum to ensure that you are GDPR compliant. This feature on Voyager allows you to check client details every 6 months. Once you confirm those details are correct or update them, you will not be asked to check them for another 6 months. It's also important that we store data for only as long as is necessary. Guidelines state that we should keep information for 7 years. It's really important for those of you in practice who have archive rooms that might contain data older than 7 years, that you take steps to sort through that information and dispose of anything that is no longer relevant to it correctly. We need to understand that the GDPR applies to all data held by a company, and it can be broadly split into 2 categories. Personal data. This is information such as names, addresses, date of births, or any identifying information such as any picture ID held. This is the most common form of data that you will come into contact with in a veterinary practice. However, you should also be aware of the other category known as special category data. This refers to race, religion, political beliefs, political affiliations, trade union memberships, philosophical beliefs, or sexuality. This type of data is afforded special protections under GDPR. In the unlikely event that you store such information for whatever reason, it's important that you know it needs to be treated with extra care and diligence. Despite the fact that the IVC IT team have been instrumental in implementing GDPR compliance measures, you need to understand that this is not a technological issue. GDPR applies to all paper records too, in addition to how we conduct ourselves in our practice day to day. We need to make sure that we are using the data we store ethically and in line with a person's wishes or expectations. Under no circumstances should we use any data for something that a reasonable person would not expect us to use it for in line with our duties. GDPR also sets out penalties for the companies who lose, misuse, or are negligent with data they hold. These penalties can include large fines or even criminal prosecution. So, which requests are data subject access requests as covered under GDPR? Only very specific requests qualify as data subject access requests. They always come from the data subject or a representative. It's important that you understand that not every request is a DSAR to see information. You will get routine day-to-day requests such as a client asking to see what payments they've made on their account or a recent history. These are just a normal part of the service we provide and they are not DSARs. For a DSAR to be valid, it must be from the data subject or somebody acting on their behalf, such as a carer or a solicitor. And it must, at the very minimum, be a request to see all of the data we hold. As stated before, if somebody only wants to see a very small portion of the information we hold on them, such as checking their address details or a recent history or insurance information, this is not a DSAR. It is only a DSAR when somebody wants to see every piece of data that we hold on them. For it to be valid, it also needs to be identity checked to ensure that the person who is requesting the data has a legal right to access it. When you are taking a data subject access request, it's important that you observe correct identification. You need to make sure you have seen identification that shows you what they look like, so some form of picture ID, along with their name and their current address. It's also really important that these details match what we have on the system. One piece of identification might satisfy all three elements, for example, a driving license, which shows an image of the person, their name, and their current address. In some situations, however, you may need to take more than one piece of identification to satisfy these three elements. So that could be a passport, for example, giving their image and name, and then a recent council tax bill which demonstrates where they live. If for whatever reason the name or address details do not match what we have on record, we need corroborating evidence. So if they've changed their name due to marriage or depol, we need to see some form of documentation to verify this. If the address is different, then ideally we should see additional identification that shows a link to the address on record. Finally, and this is not for you to worry too much about, but for a DSR to be valid, it needs to be reasonable and lawful. There are certain conditions where we can reject a data subject access request, or if the request is particularly complicated, we may request more time, as is our right under GDPR, but we must be able to verify and justify why we have done so. Again, I don't want you to get too bogged down in this. This decision would be made by the GDPR team at Central Support. So, now that we've gone over what a DSAR needs to be valid, we're going to have a look at a few scenarios. In this scenario, Mrs. Smith has just purchased some dog food. Before she leaves, she tells you that she has had some issues with her insurance company. They said she has tried to claim for some things that Mrs. Smith is sure she has not. She thinks the insurance company might be confusing her with another Mrs. Smith. To be safe, she asked to see all of the information we hold on her. Have a think. Do we think this contains a DSAR covered under GDPR? I'm going to give you a moment to think about that before going through the answer. Okay, so this could be a DSAR request. What we would always encourage staff to do in this situation is to seek some clarification from Mrs. Smith. In day-to-day language, people may use terms such as everything or I want to see all of the information, when in reality they might want to see only a very small portion of the data that we hold on them. In this particular scenario, based on the circumstances as she describes them, Mrs. Smith might only want to see that when name and address is correct on our records and the recent insurance claims that we've made to make sure we have only claimed for things that she has had. If this is what she actually wants to see, you can process this at practice level, and a DSAR form need not be filled in. If, however, Mrs. Smith does confirm that she wants to see all of the information that we hold on her, then you will need to follow the DSAR process that we will go through in a moment. Okay, so let's have a look at a second scenario. In this scenario, a client has recently complained to you about some elements of his experience he has been unhappy with. As part of his complaint, he says that he has heard he is legally allowed to see everything that you hold on him. He asks you to make this information available to him. Have a think. Do we think this conversation includes a DSAR as covered under GDPR? Yes, this is a DSAR request. Whilst we would never discourage any member of staff from just confirming this with the client, the way it's been presented, it seems the client has a legal awareness of their right to see all of their information, and they are explicitly asking to see everything that we hold on him. In this situation, a GDPR DSAR request should be made and the proper procedure followed. Here's our final scenario for the time being. You receive an email from a referral practice with assessment notes attached for one of your clients. The email suggests that the client book into your surgery for a follow-up with a regular vet. The email says the vet can contact them if there are any questions. Do we think this contains a DSAR as covered under GDPR? Again, take a moment and we'll reveal the answer shortly. No, this is not a data subject access request. It is not from the data subject, nor is it requesting to see any information. This is a simple case of a referral centre sending some notes to be attached to a client record. You do not need to fill in a DSAR form, nor get your GDPR representative or the GDPR team at Central Support involved. Okay, so what are some of the important things to remember? First of all, we need to understand that data subject access requests can be made by the data subject or their representative, be made verbally, in writing to the practice by email or by letter, or via social media platforms. It's really important when you get any requests for any confidential information, not just those pertaining to a DSAR, that you make every effort to remove that person from social media as quickly as possible. That could be replying to them with a phone number to call, an email to write into, or asking them to pop into their local branch. Responses to data requests will always be handled by your GDPR representative or management and central support, and they are always dealt with privately. As a receptionist, you may come into contact with a DSAR via the telephone or in person. As a receptionist, you will not be expected to find the data for a DSAR request, but it's important that you can recognise one. Administrative staff may come into contact with DSARs whilst open in post, dealing with clients and monitoring practice social media accounts such as Facebook or Twitter. Again, if a client seems to want to see their data, you should always find a way to contact them outside of social media. Under no circumstances should any confidential information, whether it is qualified as a GDPR DSAR or not, be discussed on an open forum such as social media. So, what do we do when we get a DSAR? When you receive a request to access data, it is really important that you follow the DSAR process fully and promptly. We have very strict timeframes as dictated by GDPR as to when we have to reply by. Let's go through the diagram below. In the first instance, a client will request access to their data. We use client as the example in this scenario, however it could be a staff member requesting to access their data too, so please just bear that in mind as we go through the process. Once that request to access data has been made, you must fill in a paper form of the DSAR form, or if you prefer and it is appropriate, you can fill it in electronically. You then need to confirm that you have seen some suitable identification. As stated before, you must be able to confirm what that person looks like, what their name is, and what their current address is. If for whatever reason those details differ to what we have on the system, you must also confirm that they have a link to the details on the system. So a marriage certificate or a depol letter showing their name was once as registered on the system, or some form of identification that shows they have previously had a connection with the address listed on file. Once this has been done and you have seen suitable identification, that DSAR form must be given to your GDPR representative immediately. If you have filled in a paper copy, you can pass it to them in practice. If you filled it out electronically, you might need to store it in a shared secure drive where the GDPR representative can access it and then alert them to the fact that you've placed a new form in there. The GDPR representative will then check the form that you have filled out and see if there is any information that needs to be added, or whether they need to contact the client or staff member for a more suitable form of identification. Once they are happy, if the form has been submitted by paper, they must transfer them details onto the electronic form. If the form has already been done electronically, they simply need to check it and then securely send this by email to the GDPR team at the Central Support Office. Once it is received by the GDPR team at Central Support, if they are happy for you to proceed, they will validate the request and alert you to start collecting the data at practice level. This is done by the GDPR representative. The GDPR representative must then collect that data and securely send it back to the GDPR team. Once that's been received, the GDPR team will do their final checks and then send the information directly to the client or staff member, whoever requested it in the first instance. Don't worry too much for now about what data to be included. We're going to go through that in more detail in stage 2, which is specifically for your GDPR representatives. In order to make sure we meet the tight deadlines, this process needs to happen swiftly, and ideally a completed form should be with your GDPR representative before the end of the day that the request was made. If there is any delay in obtaining identification, which might be likely if somebody has come in and asked for their data without bringing appropriate identification, the form should still be completed and submitted to the GDPR representative immediately. A note should be made that the identification was not available at the time of the request, and the GDPR representative should then take steps to make sure they see valid identification before submitting the form to central support. So how do we complete a DSAR form? You'll be able to access the new DSAR form online, and you can choose whether you want to print it, which might be more appropriate if the practice is busy because you will be discussing confidential information, so it might be better to print it and hand it to the client to fill in. You can, however, submit it online, and that might only be appropriate if there is only one person at the desk, for example, because you will need to ask the person making the data request some quite confidential information, and it wouldn't be wise to do that within earshot of other clients. Whichever you choose, the GDPR representative must submit it electronically to the GDPR team at Central Support. As stated before, this needs to be done as soon as possible, preferably before the end of that day. Here is an image of what the form will look like. All of the information here is fairly straightforward. However, if you struggle, in addition to being able to download the form, there will be a support sheet to help you. I just want to draw your attention to the different areas of the form to give you an indication of what sort of information is required there. We need to know which practice has sent this and who has taken it in the practice. As stated earlier, the data subject is the person to whom the information relates to. However, sometimes the person requesting to see that data is someone else. As we said before, authorised representatives such as carers or solicitors might need to see the data of somebody under their care or instruction. We must make sure we fill out the details of the data subject and the requester completely. We also need to know how they would prefer to receive their data back. Some people would prefer post and others email. The GDPR team will try as far as possible to submit it by the method they have selected and will contact them if they're unable to do so. One area of the form which can sometimes cause confusion is under other information. Here we ask for any other practices that we might need to collect data from. Because IVC is such a large company, it could be that they have been to another IVC practice. What's important for you to say to the client as the person handling this request initially is that if they list any practices here that are not part of the IVC family, then obviously we will be unable to obtain any data that they hold, and they should contact that practice directly. Any practices that they list there will be checked by central support to make sure they are part of IVC. It's really important that we see the identification and we mark off what we have seen. We don't take photocopies of this identification because this generates yet more confidential information to be stored and handled. Instead, the person taking the request, in this scenario likely a receptionist or an administrator, needs to tick what they've seen. In the event that they don't have any forms of identification listed on this form, you will see that there are other boxes. You can tick those and write down exactly what they have provided you, as well as the information that's contained on it. So does it show their image or their name or an address? It's really important to make sure that we are staying compliant with the timeframes as dictated under GDPR, that we fill in the correct date of the request. There is also a comments box where you can put any additional information which might be useful to the person processing this form. So it could be an explanation of a scenario under why this person is making this request, or it could be some details on where to find some of this data, or a particular piece of data that somebody is interested in seeing. Remember though, it is only a DSAR if they're requesting to see everything. So this comments box should just be used to help us process their request as fully as possible. If you find that filling in this form is difficult, The most important thing that you can do is get the correct name and contact details for the data subject and the person making the request. At the very least, we'll be able to contact them to clarify anything we're not sure of at a later date. A quick scenario for you here. A woman approaches reception and introduces herself as Mr. Foster's solicitor. Mr. Foster has been a client at your practice for a long time. Recently, however, he has had some issues with the service that has been provided to him regarding his dog Puppy. The solicitor says that she should need to access all of the data that we hold on Mr. Foster and asks you to make this information available to her. It's important to note that the very first step here is to confirm that this person is authorised to act on behalf of Mr. Foster. You should speak to your practice manager to confirm this. Once you've received word that this person is an authorised representative of Mr. Foster, what do we think we should do next? Should you complete a data subject access request form and submit it via the correct channels for consideration? Or should you seek some further clarification about what exactly the solicitor wants to have before coming to a decision? I'm just going to give you a moment to have a think about that. This could be a DSAR, but you should seek some clarification first. If the events are as the lady at the reception desk has described, it could be that she is working under Mr. Foster's instruction and is therefore an authorised representative. It would also be a good idea to clarify whether the solicitor is requesting everything under GDPR or whether they want to see specific pieces of information. As stated before, if they're not requesting to see all of the data we hold on Mr. Foster, it might be that we need to provide her with some smaller amounts of data which are not part of the DSAR process. It could be handled at practice level if she only wants to see, say, a recent history, for example, some recent payments, or the treatment history. If, though, she confirms she would like to see everything, then we must ensure that the data subject access request procedure is followed fully and fully explain the situation on the comments part of the form. It is possible that this request will be accepted or rejected by GDPR team at Central Support, but this is not a decision you would be expected to make. You should advise the solicitor that Central Support will be processing this form and be in contact with her if there are any concerns. So, what would you do in this scenario? You receive a phone call from another practice to request you send over the clinical history as the client is moving to their practice. Does this contain a data subject access request? How would you respond? Okay, that's fine. You'll follow your practice procedure and release that data as soon as you're confirmed with the client that they are happy for you to do so. Or would you complete a data subject access request form and submit it via the correct channels for consideration? Or as a receptionist, would you seek some further clarification from your GDPR representative? Or as a GDPR representative, would you maybe want some confirmation from the GDPR team before proceeding? Have a little think and we'll go through the answer in a moment. You would follow your practice procedure in this situation. It's really important that you understand the DSAR process refers to a very specific set of criteria. It must be made from the data subject or someone acting on their behalf and be a request to see all of the information that we hold on them. As part of the DSAR process, it would need to be checked for identification. In this situation, you need to follow your practice policies. If you're confident that the person you're speaking to is the person on your record, you don't need to ask for identification. You should follow normal data protection rules that you've been following for a number of years now. It's really important that you don't fill out superfluous DSAR forms, as you'll overload the team at Central Support. you need to make sure you can distinguish between a routine day-to-day request and a DSAR request. If you're not sure, you should contact your GDPR representative for some clarification, and they may need to contact the GDPR team. But as a general rule, DSAR should not frustrate the normal day-to-day workings of a practice. Small requests for small pieces of information are never DSARs. It's only a DSAR when they request to see all of their data. So, now we've discussed DSARs and the process, we need to think about protecting the data that we hold. To do that, we need to know what a personal data breach is. Simply put, if the personal data a company handles falls into the wrong hands, is lost or destroyed, then a breach has occurred. It does not matter if this was done deliberately, by accident, or by omission, or because the company failed to introduce proper security measures. A breach has still occurred. If you ever encounter a situation in practice where there has been a data breach, you must report it immediately to your GDPR representative. Your GDPR representative, in turn, needs to report it as swiftly as possible to the GDPR team at Central Support. It's really important that you understand that it is not your place at practice level to decide whether a breach is significant or not. In any situation where any breach has occurred, whether you consider this to be minor or quite significant, needs to be reported to your GDPR team. The ICO is more likely to view companies with strong data protection protocols and policies with more sympathy and therefore impose lighter penalties or charges. So it's really important that you're following data protection principles day to day. You need to make sure that you're thinking about data protection and how you conduct yourself. If you do see poor practices that might lead to a potential data breach, it's important that you highlight these to your GDPR representative before a breach occurs. At this point, the GDPR representative should take measures to close that gap to try and make sure that a data breach doesn't occur in future. If for whatever reason you're unsure on how to do that, or the GDPR representative is unsure, then they should get in contact with the GDPR team at Central Support. The GDPR Central team would be happy to assist your GDPR representative and practice manager in improving their security procedures. You can contact the Central Support GDPR team on 01225 489 829 extension 219 or by email on gdpr@independentvetcare.co.uk. How do we keep our data secure in practice? I'd like you to have a look at this image. Please bear in mind that this is during opening hours. In this image here, there are 6 sources of a potential data breach. I'd like to highlight to you that I say potential data breach. It's really important that you have a very clear distinction in your mind as to what is a potential source of a data breach and when a data breach has actually occurred. If we see situations where information could be mishandled, but it has not yet happened, then this is a potential data breach, which doesn't need to be reported to the GDPR team, although you should make your GDPR representative aware in practice so that they can take measures to avoid this happening in future. Once, however, any information has ended up in the wrong hands, been incorrectly lost or destroyed, then a data breach has occurred, and this must be reported to your GDPR representative, who in turn must report it to the GDPR team at Central Support. Bearing that in mind, can you look at this image and spot all 6 potential data breaches? I'll give you a moment to look at that, and then we'll go through them one by one. Okay, so let's go through those. First and foremost, we have staff files in an unlocked filing cabinet in quite a public area of the practice. It's really important that we make sure that staff files are secured somewhere under lock and key, where other staff members or members of the public are not able to see it. Just think for a moment what sort of information is contained in your staff folders. Name, address, date of birth, where you went to school, national insurance number, maybe even your hobbies and interests. If this information were to fall into the wrong hands, there is a massive potential for identity theft to occur, and we need to make sure we are safeguarding our staff from that. 2. We can see the computer here has been used to access a non-work related site. It's possible this computer has contracted a virus. It's really important that we are vigilant with how we use our machines in practice. Any viruses can destroy, steal, encrypt, or delete data that we have on our systems, which would be a breach under GDPR. Despite the fact that this is the middle of the day, our reception area has been left completely unmanned. This compounds the issue with the computer, which has been left logged on. Anybody could access the private areas of our practice here and maybe be able to log onto our PMS system and see details of other clients. This isn't really acceptable, and we need to make sure that we are manning reception at all times when the practice is open. If for whatever reason this is not possible, then all confidential information needs to be protected. We have patient notes outside of a consult room ready for the next client to go in. Those of you that are on Voyager or similar PMS systems that allow easy transfer of notes between reception and the consult room might not have issues like this in practice. However, those of you on less sophisticated PMS systems or still on paper-based systems might have similar practices and procedures at the moment. It's really important that you look carefully how you handle notes throughout the day. In this particular situation, any client walking in, anybody off the street, could come in and look at the private information of one of the clients in our care. This isn't acceptable. If you think that you are handling information in a similar way in your practice at the moment, you need to take immediate steps to rectify that, consulting your GDPR representative and if needs be the GDPR team at Central Support. We can also see that some confidential papers have been left on top of the desk. This is again made worse by the fact that reception is unmanned. Anybody could come and steal or look at this data and we would never know. Also, even if the receptionist was there, any client coming up to the desk for assistance can see what information is contained in these documents, therefore potentially leading to a breach. And last but not least, we have a USB pen drive left on the reception desk. The amount of personal data that can be contained on these portable storage devices can be vast. It's really important when we're working throughout the day that we always know exactly where our portable data storage items are, and that we're taking measures to make sure they are kept securely and away from areas where they shouldn't be left. So, continuing on with data protection, we need to think carefully about protecting staff data. I'd like to have a read of the following scenario. I will be telling you a brief overview of it if you're not able to read it all in time. Sarah is a staff member who's been off sick for some time and comes in to speak to the receptionist. She hopes to give a letter to the practice manager, but is informed by Lucy, the receptionist, that the practice manager is not in. Sarah leaves a letter with her to give to the practice manager, and Lucy takes it. After Sarah has left, as the envelope is not sealed, Lucy sees that inside it contains a medical note that shows that Sarah has been suffering from depression. Sometime later, whilst chatting with colleagues, Lucy says how badly she feels for poor Sarah and she hopes that she gets better soon. She then returns to her reception desk and puts the open envelope on the desk and waits for the practice manager to return. When she does, the practice manager picks it up and takes it to her office with her. Have a think about that scenario. What happened there that could have compromised data security? I'll give you a moment to read through the responses and then we'll go through the answers. Okay, so it's the bottom three. First of all, knowing that this letter was for the practice manager's eyes only, Lucy should never have looked inside. Once she did look inside, however, and saw information she was not supposed to see, under no circumstances should she have discussed this with another member of staff. Although her intentions were well-meaning, a breach has actually occurred twice at this point, once when Lucy has seen information she wasn't supposed to, and again when she discloses it to other staff members. Then, once she knows this contains confidential medical data, Lucy should have took the initiative to store it somewhere more securely for when the practice manager returned, rather than leaving it in the reception area and risking other staff members potentially seeing this data too. If this scenario happened in practice, what do we think the potential ramifications of this could be? Again, just take a moment to have a look through the options there, and then we'll go through the answers. It's all of the above. In this situation, because we have failed to treat Sarah's medical information with the due care and diligence it was entitled to, we've potentially created a situation where Sarah is no longer comfortable returning to work. It could be that she's really upset that other staff members know this about her medical information and they weren't supposed to. We also need to acknowledge that at least 2 breaches have occurred in this scenario. These would need to be reported to your GDPR representative, who would in turn need to report it to the GDPR team. It's possible that we may face some sanctions from the ICO for mishandling Sarah's data, and we could be at risk of receiving a fine. We also need to think about the impact of our actions on Sarah's life outside of work. Many veterinary practices are set in small communities, and information like this can quickly spread from staff members in practice to people in the community, meaning that she could be uncomfortable outside of work as well. It's really important that we treat our staff information with just as much care as we would treat our clients' information. Please forgive me if it feels like I'm labouring this point. However, in reality and practice, we work with our colleagues, who often become our friends. In this situation, it's easy to let formalities slip and for data to end up in the wrong hands when it shouldn't do. We need to think really carefully to make sure that we are always conscious of how we treat our colleagues' information when conducting ourselves in the business day to day. So, now that we've learned what a data breach is, what exactly can lead to a data breach occurring? This can be broadly split into 3 categories. We have unintentional actions. This could be when somebody's being a little bit careless, when they've done something where it didn't even enter their mind that a data breach could occur. It could also be through intentional actions. This is where somebody deliberately steals or misuses or gains access to information which they are not legitimately allowed to see. This can be done for personal gain or in some situations through vengeance. And crime. Viruses and malware may infect our computer systems, and they can steal, encrypt, or destroy our data. People may pose as somebody else in order to gain access to information to which they are not entitled to view. And there's always the risk of identity theft that we need to be aware of. So how can we safeguard ourselves against these potential data breaches? So to guard against your unintentional actions, you need to be data conscious in the way you work day to day. You need to make sure that confidential data is not left lying around, including staff records. When you leave your workstation, you should always lock your work screen, and you can do this simply by holding down your Windows key and the letter L on your keyboard. When you return, you simply need to enter the password for your computer to log back on. You need to make sure that you familiarise yourselves with your practice's privacy procedures and that you're adhering to them day to day. If you're not familiar with those procedures, you should contact your practice manager or your GDPR representative. The golden rule for unintentional actions is to always ask for permission rather than forgiveness. You should always double check before disclosing any information if you are ever unsure as to whether you are able to or not. To guard against some intentional actions, we need to be aware of what is happening around us. So we need to make sure that we follow the correct leavers process to ensure that ex-employees do not have access to systems after they leave. You need to think carefully about the leavers process you have in place at the moment and make sure that it safeguards your practice against ex-employees gaining access. This is not necessarily just a case of disabling their access to the PMS system and removing their keys. You need to think very carefully about what else they have access to. Do they have access to your email system via a web browser? If you use a webmail-based program, can they log on at home? If so, you should be changing those passwords. Do they have access to your pet plan portal or to charity portals? Do they have the key codes to gates or safes? If so, you need to take measures to ensure these people cannot access these systems after they leave the company. We also need to be vigilant about what is happening in the practice as far as where non-staff members or visitors are allowed, or what they can gain access to. Are they left in a position where they could easily view information that was not intended for their eyes? Are they left unsupervised in the practice? You need to think carefully about where people can go in your practice and what that might enable them to see. We also need to make sure that we are confident that we can report anything that we feel is not quite right. As a receptionist or somebody in the practice, you might want to report this to your practice manager or your GDPR representative. If you feel like something is happening that shouldn't be, though, and you're not comfortable speaking to your GDPR representative or your practice manager, you need to know that you can contact your GDPR team directly at Central Support. To guard against crime, we need to be sensible. So we need to make sure we're using company computers for business-related matters only. This should minimise the risk of it contracting a malicious program or virus. We need to make sure that we report any incidents where we feel a computer might be infected with a malicious program or virus. Some things to look out for are your documents as you've left them. If they were legible, but now you're opening them and they're full of exclamation marks, @ symbols, wingdings, or characters that you don't recognise, rendering them unreadable, it's possible that that PC has contracted a cryptolock virus or a ransomware virus. These viruses encrypt data and then demand a sum of money to unlock them for us. You also need to be aware of if you feel like you don't have control of your screen, if it's being glitchy, if you feel like somebody might be working in the background. It could be that someone has remoted onto our system and has been able to gain access to our network and is trying to steal data in the background. Another possible sign that a virus is working its way through your system is that your computer is running excessively slow, far slower than it ever would normally. If you have any suspicions that your computer is infected, you should contact the IVC IT team immediately. If for whatever reason you're unable to obtain the IT team immediately, you should take all measures to isolate this computer immediately. This could be shutting it down and unplugging it from the network. It's important that you don't do this with your server, though. You must continue to try and get into contact with the IT team as soon as possible. Again, as with intentional actions, we need to be vigilant about who we allow to access our premises. Now, this might not just be non-staff members and visitors. We need to think of how we conduct ourselves in practice. On a hot summer's day, do you pin open the back door to allow some air flow through your practice? If so, could somebody come into your practice through the back door and gain access to information that they shouldn't be, or even your safe? We also need to make sure that we don't give out confidential information on the phone. You will deal with many client queries day to day over the telephone, and naturally you want to be as helpful as possible, but it could be as simple as just rewording the way you deal with that request. So, for example, if somebody calls up and asks you what address and phone number you have on their record, rather than reading it back to them, you should ask them, what address should we have and what phone number should we have? If it differs to the one that we have on the system, you should make a note of it and confirm it the next time the client is in. So what are the consequences of a data breach? Well, initially, we have the potential to cause our clients or colleagues a lot of emotional distress. Obviously, this is not desirable. We value our clients and our staff members very much. We want them to be happy to come into our practices. We also need to think of the impact of other staff members. We might provoke clients into anger. They might come into a practice and behave hostile towards other members of staff, and it's not fair to put your colleagues in that position, nor do we ever want to provoke that response from a client. We need to be aware of the risk of identity theft. I'm sure I need not point out to you that the ramifications of identity theft can be vast. It can ruin somebody's reputation in their community or impact them severely financially. We also need to think about the business. If clients or staff members feel like we do not handle their information with due care, they may choose to go to another practice that will. Again, we adore the pets that we look after and the clients that we build our relationships with. We also love all our staff members that work so hard for us, and so for somebody to leave over poor data handling policies would be very sad indeed. As well as all of these, we also need to be aware that the GDPR dictates actual penalties and fines. So in the event of a significant data breach, IVC can receive a fine of up to 4% of their global turnover. Just to put that into context for you, that is not 4% of your practice, that's not 4% of your region or even the UK. That's 4% of the turnover that is generated across every single one of our sites across all of the globe. So it impacts our turnover in Europe as well. Even in the event of a significant data breach, we could also be subject to criminal prosecution. And we really need to be vigilant about that. This legislation really does have some bite to it, so we need to respect it for the piece of legislation that it is and make sure that we are handling data consciously and securely day to day. In summary, in practice, it seems unlikely that you will receive a data subject access request every day, day in, day out. As this is new legislation, however, we really can't predict the levels. But it's really important that you can recognise a data subject access request when one is made. Again, the important things to remember are that they can be made either verbally or in written form, either electronically or on paper, or via social media platforms. Any request from someone to access all of the data that is held on them or someone in their care could be considered a DSAR request, and the DSAR process followed. When a client has filled out a DSAR form or a staff member, you must inform them that this now goes to central support for processing and that someone will be in touch with them shortly. The correspondence they receive from central support will contain information on who to contact should they have any further questions, and perhaps give them an outline of the timescale that they are looking at before they receive their data. If you are ever unsure as to whether or not a DSAR has been made, you should always take full details and seek clarification from your management, your GDPR representative. If you are the GDPR representative and you're still not sure if it is a valid DSAR, please contact the GDPR team at Central Support. The most important thing here is that you do not ignore it. People have a legal right to see the information that we hold on them, and if we deny them that right, then we are non-compliant with GDPR. We have to understand that GDPR protects staff information as well as client information. One of the most important things to remember is that you are not alone in interpreting this data. So, if you get a request and you're not sure if it relates to a data subject access request or indeed to GDPR and you would like further assistance, please don't be afraid to contact your GDPR team at Central Support. If you're not sure if it even pertains to GDPR, then maybe speak to your BSM. If you're a receptionist, all queries regarding GDPR should initially go through your GDPR representative. Don't worry though, we don't expect you to be conversant in the legal aspects of GDPR. You just need to know when to ask for help if you're not sure. Thank you very much for looking at Stage 1 of GDPR in practice. In a moment, we're going to move on to Stage 2. Stage 2 is specifically for your GDPR representatives, practice managers, or clinical directors that might need to have a little bit more of an in-depth knowledge of the DSAR process and what is required. If you do not need to know this information, so you are a receptionist or an administrator, you might not need to watch Section 2. So just check with your GDPR representative if you're unsure. Welcome to GDPR in Practice Stage 2. As previously specified, this part of the programme is specifically for GDPR representatives, although practice managers or clinical directors might wish to view this part as well. The objectives of this presentation are to understand the role of the GDPR representative, to understand how to submit an electronic DSAR form to the GDPR team, to understand what to do following the rejection of a DSAR, to understand what to do following the approval of a DSAR, to be able to locate all of the client data necessary, to understand how to send all of that data securely to the GDPR team at Central Support, and you will receive a summary of the final steps of the DSAR process for your contextual knowledge. You have just viewed Stage 1 of GDPR in Practice, and you should have already viewed the GDPR awareness video at this stage. If you have not done so, we strongly recommend you do both of those things before proceeding. So, as a GDPR representative, you've been selected as the individual within an IVC practice that has been designated to liaise directly with the GDPR Central Office team to assist with the processes surrounding DSARs. You are responsible for ensuring that a DSAR has followed the correct protocol and identification processes. You need to identify any missing information prior to the submission of a DSAR. You need to then submit that DSAR securely to the GDPR team, and once a DSAR has been approved, you will be responsible for gathering that information. So, how do you submit an electronic DSAR form? If the person who initially took the request has completed the form on paper, you need to check it and, if need be, transfer it onto the electronic form. If they've submitted it on electronic form already, however, you'll just need to check it. To do this, you should go through identifying any information that might be missing, and that the identification that's been supplied has been sufficient to meet the needs. If the DSAR request requires further information, you should contact the data subject or the requester directly before processing the form to the GDPR team at Central Support. Once you've got a valid DSAR form, so you are satisfied that all of the information is present and that the identification seen has satisfied the criteria of demonstrating their name, their address, and what they look like, you can then submit it via email securely to the GDPR team at Central Support on gdpr@independentvetcare.co.uk. If at any point a paper form has been used, you must now securely destroy that original document. It's really important that you use a shredder to do so. You should be investing in a cross-cut shredder and not a standard shredder in order to do so. So, how do we password protect the electronic DSAR form? Once you've transferred all the information onto the electric form if needed to, or have the electric form in front of you, you should save it to a folder. As a GDPR representative, you will most likely have a folder on your desktop called GDPR. Then in the Word document, you should go to the View tab and select the Properties button. From the three options that then come up, you need to select Protect Document. At the submenu that appears, you need to select Encrypt with Password. Enter into the password section your practice postcode in capital letters with no spaces. So the example here is capital G, capital U, 219, capital H, capital G. You will then be asked to confirm that password and should enter the same again. This document, once saved, is now password protected and secure and ready to send. It's really important that you don't divulge this password format to anybody in the practice who's not authorised to view it. It's also really important that when you email this document to Central Support GDPR team, that you don't include this password anywhere in the body of the email. If you do so, you leave the email vulnerable if it's intercepted. Somebody would have all the information they need to unencrypt that document, therefore defeating the point of doing it in the first place. So, once GDPR team at Central Support have that DSAR request, what do you do if it's rejected? In order to understand that, we first need to understand what exactly the GDPR team at Central Support do when they get your document. They confirm it's valid. They also make sure they identify any possible fraud that might be occurring. They will check to see if the request is excessive in nature, and as stated in stage 1, if it is, it might be rejected because of this or more time requested. They will be looking for a possible lack of correct information and anything else that doesn't sit right with them. They may have suspicions about the authenticity of the form. If the GDPR team are concerned with any of the above, the DSAR will be rejected. As the GDPR representative, you will be notified as well as the client or the requester. You will be given a reason why it has been rejected. If it's a case of a misunderstanding or missing information, that person might be invited to submit a DSAR form again once they've cleared up the misunderstanding or filled in the form fully. If that is the case, the standard GDPR DSAR process should be followed again, this time more thoroughly, making sure that all the information is present and you've taken into account any comments or feedback from the initial rejection. What do you do if it's approved? We're going to go through a workflow together. So initially, the GDPR team at Central Support will notify you as the GDPR representative that that DSAR has been approved and needs to be actioned. As the GDPR representative, you are now responsible for collecting all of that client data. We will go through exactly what data needs to be included in a moment. Once you have all that data, you're responsible for sending it securely back to Central Support, to the GDPR team. Once they've received your information back, then they're going to further process it, go through all of that data, make sure that it is correct and consistent, and if need be, redact any information that is not compliant with GDPR. They could need to redact information because it reveals personal details about another data subject to which that person would be entitled to see, or there might be a legal reason why they need to redact it. That's not a decision you would be expected to make. Once they've processed it and they're satisfied that the information is now ready, it will be sent directly to the requester. I say requester because in most cases this will be the client. However, it could be an authorised representative or a staff member, so please do bear that in mind. Once that data has been sent back to the person who requested it, you will be notified as the GDPR representative that that data has been sent. As long as the person who's received that data has no further questions or is confident that nothing is missing, that should be the last you should hear about this DSAR. So, once it's been approved, you'll get a notification email telling you that you need to start gathering this information together. Broadly speaking, all data that relates to that client needs to be sent. It's not just your PMS data. Anything pertaining to that data subject needs to be included. This data could be located anywhere within your practice. It's not just electronic formats. We're going to go through a checklist of some things that you might need to include. So, first of all, you need to look at all your electronic systems, so your emails, your network drives, local drives, USB drives, any X-rays on X-ray machines, ultrasounds, CT scans, MRI scans on designated machines, as well as photographs, videos. You also need to look at any social media communications that you've had. On your PMS system, you need to look at the PET treatment history, the client notes, the patient notes, the account notes, all attached documents including but not limited to consent forms, lab reports, x-rays, charts, referral letters, welcome letters, account letters and debt letters, as well as any photographs, videos, or diagrams that you have on there. It's also really important that you understand that you include any internal notes that are logged on your systems, even if they are not intended for the client's eyes. Those of you on Voyager need to make sure that you include pop-up notes as well. Any non-Voyager practices would need to do this too, but this is a system that has been identified as having pop-up notes as a facility. For those of you on Voyager as well, please be vigilant. You'll need to include anything that has gone out under that Communications tab. You also need to check the vet XML to see if you have any documents pertaining to that anywhere. In addition to your PMS system, you'll need to go through your manual and paper systems. So that's your filing cabinets, shelves and boxes that could contain printed documents, such as consent forms, lab reports, referral letters, welcome letters, account letters and debt letters, as well as animal healthcare registration forms, pet track microchip registration forms, or insurance claim forms, as well as any film, X-rays, CTs, MRIs or ultrasounds. Any data that has been shared with a third party must also be included. If, for example, you've sent off an insurance claim and the original document has been destroyed, then you should still indicate this to the GDPR team and just make a note that that original document was securely destroyed. In some situations, depending on the nature of the request, it could be that we need to contact that third party to obtain a copy. Plus, anything else that you might hold on there that pertains to the client. It need not contain the client's name and address, but if it's related to their account, they are entitled to have it. So, we're going to go through a little scenario here. A DSAR has been approved for Mr. Smith with his dog Rocky. You are gathering the data for this request and you find the following items: a blood laboratory test, patient note on the PMS saying that Rocky is nervous, you need to muzzle him, a referral letter from Mr. Smith's previous veterinary practice, a weight chart, a pop-up note saying Mr. Smith needs to clear his bill on his next visit, X-rays, a USB stick containing videos of Rocky during hydrotherapy sessions. Of all of these documents, which ones do we think we need to include when gathering data for a DSAR request? I'll give you a moment to think about that, and then we'll reveal the answer. Think back to stage 1 in your GDPR awareness video. All of them. Even though some of these types of data might not seem obvious because they don't include the client's surname on a video, for example, it relates to them. It's their personal data and they're entitled to all of it, and we have a legal obligation to supply them with it. It's really important that you don't fall into the trap of trying to decide what is and is not relevant. Even internal notes need to be shared. If there is a note that you are a bit worried about the client seeing, you can bring it to the GDPR team's attention when it's sent. However, if they have no legal right to, they cannot redact it. It is not a decision for you to make about what information should be excluded or not. If it pertains to the client in any way, shape or form, you should send it along with all the other data. If you're ever unsure about whether something is relevant, you can contact the GDPR team at Central Support for further guidance. So how do we send all the data? When we have all our data gathered, we're going to need to send it securely to the GDPR team at Central Support. The first time you do this, you need to contact the IT help desk and get them to install some zip software on your computer. This should only need to be done once, and then from that point on, the software will be there ready to use. You need to scan all paper documents and save them to a folder, and move all electronic documents into the same folder. Once all the items are within one folder, you need to zip it, and then password protect it. Once the zipped and password protected folder has been made, you can attach it to an email. The subject line of that email should be DSAR - your practice name with your site in brackets - the animal's name followed by the client's surname. You should send it to gdpr@independentvetcare.co.uk. Because password protecting a folder is more complicated than password protecting an individual document, We still need to work out further guidelines for you to be able to send that securely. If you get a data subject access request in the meantime, contact GDPR team at Central Support for further guidance. Until then, keep an eye on your inboxes to see for further instructions. Any items that cannot be emailed, such as film images, should be sent by a courier. They should be recorded and you should obtain proof of postage. They must be marked private and confidential and addressed specifically for the GDPR team at Central Support using the Chocolate Factory address. So, what are the final steps in the DSAR process? Once that GDPR team at Central Support receive all of the data that you've sent them, they'll go through it, check it for accuracy, and redact any non-compliant information. They might contact you at this point to clear up anything they're not sure of, or ask you for more context or clarification on the information that you've sent. They might also contact you if they feel that information might be missing. Once all the data has been reviewed, processed, and approved, the GDPR team will send it directly to the client, staff member, or the requester. When they do that, they will notify you to say that that data has been sent back to the person who made the request. As stated before, providing there are no issues with the information that person receives, this should be the end of the DSAR request for you. As reiterated in stage 1, it's really important that you understand that there is a support network here for you. If you are struggling with any aspect of GDPR, please do contact the GDPR team at Central Support for further guidance or assistance. They can be contacted by email on gdpr@independentvetcare.co.uk, or you can call them on 01 225 489 829, extension 219. Thank you very much for taking the time to go through stage 1 and stage 2 of GDPR in practice. We hope that this has provided you a framework for which you can understand your responsibilities in relation to GDPR and the DSAR process in practice. As we have said, if you do need any further assistance, please do contact the GDPR team for help. Thank you very much and goodbye.